100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel García Márquez. Many years later, as he faced the firing squad, Colonel Aureliano Buendía was to remember that distant afternoon when his father took him to discover ice. This iconic memory anchors the sprawling, cyclical tale of the Buendía family and the isolated, magical town they founded, Macondo. The patriarch, José Arcadio Buendía, is a man of unbridled imagination and relentless curiosity, a youthful patriarch whose feverish obsessions push him to seek the wonders of the world. He is anchored to reality only by his wife and cousin, Úrsula Iguarán, an active, small, and severe woman with unbreakable nerves and immense practical energy. Fleeing their ancestral home after José Arcadio kills a man named Prudencio Aguilar, whose sad, lonely ghost haunts them, the couple leads an expedition through an impenetrable jungle. They eventually stop by a river of prehistoric white stones and found Macondo. Because they are cousins, Úrsula is terrified of consummating their marriage, haunted by a family precedent of a child born with the cartilaginous tail of a pig. Though they eventually overcome this fear and have normal children, the dread of the pig's tail lingers over the bloodline for a century. In its early utopian days, Macondo is introduced to the outside world by a tribe of ragged, wandering gypsies. Their leader is Melquíades, a heavy, gloomy man with an untamed beard, sparrow hands, and an Asiatic look that seems to know the other side of things. He brings technological marvels, magnets, telescopes, flying carpets, and alchemy. José Arcadio Buendía becomes dangerously obsessed with these inventions, slowly losing his connection to his family. Meanwhile, the first generation of Macondo children grows up. There is José Arcadio, the eldest, a monumental, impulsive brute of a boy who runs off with the gypsies. Aureliano, a silent, withdrawn child born with his eyes open and a gift for clairvoyance, who grows into an expert silversmith. And Amaranta, a girl with a somewhat graceless appearance, but a natural, inner tightness. The family also takes in a distant relative, Rebecca, a frail orphan with greenish skin and large, startled eyes, who arrives carrying a sack of her parents, clanking bones and suffering from a vice of eating damp earth and whitewash. Rebecca inadvertently brings an insomnia plague to Macondo, a disease that strips the townspeople of their memories. To combat this, José Arcadio Buendía begins obsessively labeling every object in town, but the crisis is only averted when Melquíades returns from the dead with a magical cure. Melquíades settles in the Buendía house, writing indecipherable parchments in a secluded room. The patriarch, José Arcadio Buendía, eventually loses his mind entirely, trapped in a delusion that it is always Monday. He is tied to a massive chestnut tree in the courtyard, babbling in Latin, where he remains until his death. The town's innocence shatters with the arrival of government officials and the intrusion of national politics. The handsome, angelic, and impeccably dressed Italian piano tuner Pietro Crespi arrives and inadvertently sparks a bitter, lifelong rivalry between Rebecca and Amaranta. Both women fall madly in love with him. Rebecca initially wins his hand, but when the hulking, heavily tattooed José Arcadio unexpectedly returns from his global wanderings, Rebecca is consumed by raw lust and marries him instead. Pietro Crespi then pivots to Amaranta, who torments him with cruel rejections until he slashes his wrists in despair. Amaranta, punishing herself for his death, plunges her hand into a fire and wears a black bandage over the burn for the rest of her solitary, bitter life. Meanwhile, Aureliano falls in love with Remedios Moscote, the impossibly young, lily-skinned, green-eyed daughter of the local conservative magistrate. They marry, but the child bride dies tragically with twins in her womb. Consumed by grief and incensed by the corruption of the conservative government, Aureliano launches an armed rebellion. He becomes Colonel Aureliano Buendía, a mythical and ubiquitous guerrilla leader. He leaves Macondo in the hands of Arcadio, the illegitimate son of the tattooed José Arcadio, and Pilar Ternera, a merry, foul-mouthed woman with a smell of smoke, who serves as a sexual initiator for multiple Buendía men. Arcadio, a monumental youth with a square head, becomes a brutal, bloodthirsty dictator in Macondo until conservative forces recapture the town and execute him by firing squad. Colonel Aureliano Buendía's military career is vast and futile. He organizes 32 armed uprisings and loses them all. He survives 14 assassination attempts, 73 ambushes, and a firing squad. During his campaigns, he fathers 17 sons by 17 different women, all named Aureliano, and marked with an indelible cross of ashes on their foreheads. The war hardens the colonel. He draws a 10-foot chalk circle around himself, forbidding even his mother Úrsula from approaching. Realizing the war has lost all meaning and is now fought only for power, he forces his own party to sign the Treaty of Neerlandia. Disillusioned, he shoots himself in the chest, but the bullet miraculously misses his vital organs. He retires to his workshop in Macondo, spending the rest of his life crafting tiny gold fishes, melting them down, and remaking them in an endless cycle of sterile concentration. The next generation brings explosive prosperity to Macondo. Arcadio's twin sons, Aureliano II and José Arcadio II, mirror the family's cyclical nature. Aureliano II is a colossal, boisterous, purple-faced glutton. He marries Fernanda del Carpio, a rigidly aristocratic woman with a stony gait and a cloistered, delusional pride, who was raised to believe she would be a queen. However, Aureliano II spends his life with his concubine, Petra Coates, a mulatto woman with panther-like ferocity and yellow almond-shaped eyes. Petra's love inexplicably causes livestock to breed at a supernatural rate, making Aureliano II fabulously wealthy. He literally papers the walls of the Buendía mansion with banknotes and hosts legendary eating contests. His twin, José Arcadio II, is a linear, solemn, and brooding man who organizes the town's workers. The family's wealth coincides with the arrival of the American Banana Company, led by the slippery Mr. Brown. The Americans build a segregated, electrified town and plunge Macondo into a dizzying era of foreign exploitation. During this chaotic boom, we meet Remedios the Beauty, a woman with a shaved head and a coarse nightshirt who possesses a beauty so devastating it inadvertently causes the deaths of multiple suitors. Blissfully oblivious to the physical world, she eventually ascends bodily into heaven while folding a pristine white sheet in the garden. Tensions between the Banana Company and its exploited workers eventually erupt. José Arcadio II helps organize a massive strike. In response, the army lures 3,000 workers and their families to the train station under the guise of negotiations. Without warning, machine guns open fire, slaughtering the entire crowd. José Arcadio II wakes up wounded on an endless, silent train packed tightly with corpses, headed for the sea to be dumped like rejected bananas. He escapes and returns to Macondo, only to find that the government has enacted a flawless cover-up. The official narrative that there were no deaths and the workers went home peacefully is accepted by everyone. To physically wash away the evidence of the massacre, the Banana Company initiates a supernatural rainstorm that lasts for 4 years, 11 months, and 2 days. The deluge ruins Macondo. The Banana Company packs up and leaves, and the town is left to drown in mud, rotting animals, and suffocating dampness. The indomitable Úrsula, who had shrunk into a blind, confused, cherry-sized husk of a woman, finally dies at an incalculable age shortly after the rain stops. Rebecca, locked away in her decaying house for decades, also dies in isolation. Aureliano II, his wealth destroyed, spends his final days desperately raffling off his last surviving animals to pay for his daughter's education before dying of a throat disease at the exact same moment as his twin brother, José Arcadio II. In the confusion of their joint funeral, their coffins are accidentally switched, fulfilling their childhood games of confused identities to the very end. The house falls under the dictatorial gloom of Fernanda. Her bright, pleasant daughter, Mime, falls deeply in love with Mauricio Babylonia, a sallow, melancholy mechanic who is always preceded by a fluttering cloud of yellow butterflies. When Fernanda discovers the affair, she has guards shoot Mauricio as a chicken thief, leaving him paralyzed for life. She banishes Mime to a silent convent where the girl never speaks another word. Months later, a nun arrives at the Buendía house carrying Mime's illegitimate infant son in a basket. Fernanda, terrified of the scandal, hides the boy, named Aureliano, in Melquíades' decaying room, claiming she found him floating in a river. The boy Aureliano grows up in total isolation, a bony, pale adolescent with a hallucinated glow in his eyes. He spends his days entirely in the study, guided by the ghost of Melquíades, learning Sanskrit to decipher the gypsy's ancient parchments. The house is briefly disrupted when Fernanda's son, José Arcadio, returns from Rome. Despite Fernanda's delusions that he was becoming the Pope, José Arcadio is actually a decadent, failed seminary student. After Fernanda's death, he discovers Ursula's long-hidden gold and turns the house into a site of lavish, predatory parties with local children. His debauchery ends violently when the children drown him in the bath to steal his gold. Finally, Amaranta Ursula, Mime's sister, returns from her studies in Europe. She is an active, modern, indomitable woman who sweeps into the rotting town with her older, submissive aviator husband, Gaston, intent on restoring the Buendia home to its former glory. Aureliano, who has never left the house, is completely captivated by her. Unaware that they are aunt and nephew, the two fall into an apocalyptic, world-destroying passion. Gaston, realizing his wife's obsession, quietly abandons them and returns to Europe. Left entirely alone in a town that is rapidly being reclaimed by the jungle, Aureliano and Amaranta Ursula abandon the world, the house, and the parchments, isolating themselves in a hermetic bubble of fierce primal lust. Their incestuous love results in a pregnancy. Amaranta Ursula gives birth to a strong, healthy boy, the only Buendia in a century conceived out of love. But as the midwife cleans the child, they discover he has the cartilaginous tail of a pig. Amaranta Ursula hemorrhages uncontrollably and bleeds to death. A devastated Aureliano wanders the ghostly, abandoned streets of Macondo seeking comfort, but finds nothing but ruin. When he returns to the house at dawn, he finds his newborn son's empty skin being dragged across the courtyard and eaten by an army of red ants. In a flash of terrifying lucidity, Aureliano finally understands the epigraph of Melquíades' parchments. The first of the line is tied to a tree, and the last is being eaten by the ants. He rushes to the study and begins to translate the Sanskrit flawlessly. He discovers that the parchments are the entire history of his family, written by Melquíades a century in advance, with all events coexisting in a single instant of time. As a warm biblical hurricane begins to tear the doors and windows off the house, wiping Macondo from the face of the earth, Aureliano reads the prophecy of his own death. He realizes he will never leave the room, for it is decreed that the city of mirrors and mirages will be exiled from the memory of men the moment he finishes deciphering the parchments, because races condemned to 100 years of solitude do not have a second opportunity on earth.